So I will say, welcome everybody to the third meeting of the MBTA 3A Advisory Committee here in Millis. And it is 7 o'clock. I'm Bob Weiss. I am the Economic Development and Planning Director for the town of Millis. And I'm going to turn everything over to Jody Garzone, who is the chair of the MBTA 3A Advisory Committee. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Bob. I am Jody Garzone. I am the chair. For our agenda tonight, will be continuing to work through the interim compliance with this MBTA 3A community's rezoning proposed bylaw and working through that. We have several members. I will mess up everyone's name if I try to say them. So refer to our meeting notes, and I'm sure we will have a full accounting of all the members who have joined us. And we also have MAPC here, who is helping facilitate this discussion. Without further ado, I did note a request from Dan to kind of have some comments from the start because he has another meeting to get to. I just came from another meeting, so I know what it's like to have Zoom back to back to back to back. So if you would like to kind of start us off with some comments that you wanted to make, why don't you go ahead and then we can go from there.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. I sent around a few emails. I just wanted to kind of talk about that a little bit, about the map that I watched the last meeting. And I wanted to impress upon the committee that I don't think you need to worry too much about having to find 50 acres of land. 50 acres of land is really not a lot of land. If you're sitting in your house, maybe it is. But in the grand scheme of things, there's hundreds and hundreds of acres of land around the downtown area, and I don't think it's going to be hard at all to find 50 acres. So my suggestion to the committee is that we should, kind of focus on what we think the best areas are. My other suggestion is I'm concerned that showing to the public, the entire downtown area, which is, again, several hundred acres of land, is just going to be too open-ended. I think it might be wise for the committee to pick a handful of areas where they think this might work, and then maybe that becomes something that is highlighted, with 4 or 5 areas before we go and present anything to the public, so that it can be a more focused discussion. The other thing that I would note to you is I know there was some discussion about Stony Brook. I just want you to be aware that Stony Brook does have a decent chunk of undeveloped land on their property, so it's not a bad idea, but recognize that if you were to put this area, the zoning district, over Stony Brook, you could end up with a fairly significantly sized proposal before you. So, which would be different than trying to, zone more densely developed areas. I look at areas kind of around, but not necessarily in the center of town. Curb Street, Exchange Street area, Lavender, those kinds of areas kind of feel to me like areas that might be good to look at for a potential overlay district. That's all. I don't know how long I can stay on. After my other meeting ends, I will try to jump back in.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dan. I lost my agenda here.
I can share that if we want to, just for a couple minutes before we get into the meeting. And I think this is the correct one, right?
So why don't we jump back up to announcements and updates? It says that interim compliance has been confirmed. So is there someone who's able to speak to that?
Madam Chair, I can do that.
Okay, great.
Okay, yeah, part of the process from DHCD is that we need to stay in compliance with the process, even though, we haven't come to the town meeting and voted on anything. And we have, there was a deadline at the end of this month, the 31st, where we had to tell DHCD what our plan was going forward. We have done that. We received our interim compliance on the 3rd of January. So, as you know, what was at stake were 3 categories of grants. So we do not have to worry about those at all. And so we are compliant and ready to go forward.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then, how do we want to proceed with continuing discussion? Do we have some updates from MAPC, or do other committee members have some questions that we want to review before we kind of jump into things again with MAPC? I can't see everyone, so you're gonna have to say something if you want to speak. I don't see any hands raised. So why don't we turn it over to our facilitators at MEPC to kind of help move us forward here.
Thanks, Nicole. I'll just pull up a little presentation that we have to guide the conversation tonight. So, get my PowerPoint up. Right. Can everybody see that?
Well, we can see your name.
My computer is running a little slow. Not sure what the issue is, but hopefully get it under control here.
Okay, there we are.
All right, is the slide up now?
It is.
Okay, great. John, do you just want to kick us off?
Yeah, thank you so much, Alex, and thank you to the committee again for hosting another fantastic meeting. We're excited to share some other details of some things we've learned and the direction of where things are going, and of course get your thoughts on how to move forward. So we have our own little sub-agenda, which is going to be on the next slide here, that kind of just talks through what we're going to be doing, talking through the public forum format, talking through the content, and then promotion, and we do finally have some answers to our questions from DHCD, and we had a good conversation with them recently, and I'm excited to share those results with everybody here as well. So, moving on to the public forum format and all the things that go along with it, we were able to have a date confirmed for this. It's going to be February 21st at 7 p.m. at the high school. And there's going to be a in-person open house broadcast by Millis TV. The way that we have this set up, and Bob, correct me if anything has changed here, but the plan was that we're shooting for the 21st. If something happens where there's concerns with inclement weather or basketball or anything else that could be a big deterrent to getting this done, we have the 28th set aside as kind of our backup date. So we're going to encourage everybody tonight to hold both of those dates in your personal calendars and keep our fingers crossed and get all the promotion stuff that we need to out, working with the idea that the 21st is going to be the day unless we have any reason to assume otherwise.
Did we clear that with the school when you said unless we have basketball or something? Did we talk with the school yet?
Yeah, we've had good conversations with the school and with their broadcast team, and kind of the situation, as I understand it, is that it's basketball tournament season.
Okay.
So what happens is a little bit outside of our control. If we could just look at a regular season schedule, it'd be a little bit easier. So we're trying to do our best to be respectful of the host, and hopefully it means we won't have to have any dates modified.
Okay, so with that, said, I'm just going to give a little bit more information about the general format and some of the content that we've produced to help us have the 3A discussion with the community and gather the community's input through this process moving into this first forum. So in your meeting packet, you should have a draft that was created as a facilitator's agenda, which has a whole lot of details about how we envision the night unfolding. I've given a brief overview of it here, so if you want to follow along on the guide, but if not, I can just kind of go over it broadly here. So we're looking at an event. It would be about 2 hours long from 7 to 9 o'clock. MAPC and town staff would arrive an hour beforehand to set up. We have several boards and materials that we want to prepare and set up different stations for people to engage with that material. So then the first 20 minutes would be a time for people to come in and walk around freely to some boards where they would learn about the project, learn about the 3A state law, what we're able to do in terms of making a zoning district or districts that complies with that. And this should give them a good grounding for having a discussion later on and doing some engagement activities to gather their thoughts. So this first part is just designed to get people acquainted to what this project is, what 3A is, and how they can participate and offer their thoughts and input. Then there'd be a presentation by MAPC, really kind of reiterating some of the key information that people should understand about 3A and really gearing people up to participate in those engagement activities. So if anybody comes late or maybe didn't get a chance to look at all the boards, some of the key information will be reiterated in this presentation. We'll emphasize the points that we really think people need to understand to be able to have a discussion about 3A in a thoughtful way and offer their input on where we go with this planning process. So from there, have 40 minutes for different engagement activities to see basically what kind of things that the community would like this planning effort to support, what types of housing and what housing should really look like, those kinds of things we want to ask the public about, and then have a engagement activity where we gather some input about where the public would be supportive of having 3A compliant zoning, and then we'd have a closing message to explain how input can be used, how their input that they're sharing that night is going to be used, and also plug a survey for anybody who is not able to make it into the forum, which would pretty much be parallel to the kinds of things that we're asking at the forum, so that folks can go and then promote that to their neighbors and reach further to get more input from the community. So we just thought that we would spend a little bit of time tonight going over some of the information boards that be presented at the walkthrough portion of the open house, that first 20 minutes where people can walk in and learn about the project, then just go over some of the things that we plan to talk about in the presentation, and then go over the boards that we have for the engagement activities. So while our last meeting really focused on our internal analysis and discussion of where 3A zoning may make sense, tonight we want to take the step further and get the committee's ideas about how we're engaging the public. So just as a general thought, we're really looking at the bigger picture and want to make sure that we're messaging things correctly based on local context, engaging the community the best way possible. And then if there's any details around language or reviewing specific boards, we can coordinate that with Bob before the forum. So I'll just go over the first part, and then John will go into the second part. So we're seeing this where people can come into the high school to a sign-up table or have a big map that just asks where folks live, and they can take a pin and put it in the map to show where they live, which just gives us a sense of where people are coming from in town. You'll see that we have some pictures of different landmarks to help people think about where they are on the map. This is something that we want to ask you about tonight to see if there are maybe better landmarks or areas of town we could put on here that would give people a better frame of reference. But this map's going to come up again later, so we'll wait to get your input on that. But just want to flag that. We'll also have the ability for people as they sign in to give us their name, email, and affiliation so that we can continue to engage with them throughout the planning process, understand if they're coming from any town committees or community groups. And then we're going to gather some demographic information as well. And the reason we want to do that is it gives us a sense of who we're talking to. So when we do look at public input, we can see, who was well represented, and then maybe there are some folks that we're not hearing from as much that we want to focus on getting out to another event. But keeping track of this information as we go can ensure that we can get representation from as much of the town as possible. And we plan to gather that information with smartphones, and then if people don't have a smartphone with them, we'll have tablets on hand so that we can just gather this information quickly. We'll have MAPC staff. In addition to John and I, we'll have several other staff members with us to assist with that. We'll have a table with some snacks and refreshments, make it an enjoyable experience. So after people come and sign in, then they'll be able to walk around the room and look at some boards that we have produced. So this is a big snapshot of the draft boards that we've created for this portion of the meeting. And again, we'd like to gather your thoughts on, do we have some good information here? Is there maybe some information that we want to bring into this? But if there's like fine-tuned details about text and just verifying different things, we're going to send this to Bob, town staff, to review in detail. And if there's any details to iron out, we can do that with Bob before the forum. But tonight we want to gather the committee's thoughts on just the information that we're presenting, and if you have any ideas about how to make it more engaging or really tailor it specifically to Millis residents, with your local expertise, that's what we're looking for. So this first board is these are going to be like 36 by 48 boards, so really big boards on easels that the people can walk around at their leisure. We'll have staff at each of them to answer questions if people are looking at them and they have a question. We can go over things with them or go into more depth on something that they might be curious about. But the first board is an overview that really follows a lot of the language that's on the project website at this point. It gives an overview of what a 3A compliant zoning district is, that this is a state regulation, that this is something that Millis is exploring, so if you protect access to state funding. And then it goes over the three big things about what a 3A compliant zone, specifically in Millis under its classification as adjacent community would need to be. So allowing development by right, but subject to standards that the town's going to set. Having a minimum gross density of 15 dwelling units per acre and having a minimum land area of 50 acres. John's going to mention later when we go over the DHCD questions that we did confirm that Millis does have that 50-acre minimum requirement, which is definitely good to have confirmed before we go into the forum. John will go over more of that later. But essentially, those are like the three big things I think people need to understand. We talk about who MAPC is, so people understand that we're there to help with our expertise and kind of the technical aspects of this work, but also to engage Millis residents. It's a public process. We really want to make that clear. So then we have a second board that's talking a big picture overview of the process, where the first part's analysis. A lot of that has happened already. We're really moving into the visioning part. So that's really looking at possible locations for 3A zoning, recommendations for how the zoning that Millis would adopt should work. And that's really a public part of this, where we want to see what the public thinks and what their vision is, and a lot of information we're gathering at the forum. And then in the summer, we would move into looking at drafting zoning based on that vision and analysis, and then moving forward into the spring of 2024. that's when we would aim to have a draft bylaw to present at town meeting, making it really clear that it would have to be approved at town meeting. Millis voters would have to consider adopting the zoning. And then that would move into winter 2024, where if we came away with a zoning that was approved by Millis voters and adopted, then it'd be submitted to the state. And then I think it's important to have a board here that just goes over some key housing terms and concepts. We've talked about some of the stuff together as a committee, but just making sure people understand when we're talking about a home that's affordable, that means it costs no more than 30% of a household's income, so that that household is not cost burdened and can afford other necessities. That household has discretionary income, so that you're just not having your finances strapped because of high housing costs, essentially. And then making a distinction between naturally occurring affordable housing, so housing that's affordable in the marketplace. This is housing that's just costs more than no more than 30% of your income naturally in the market, or it's just a lot less expensive just because of size, age, or other characteristics. Like, for example, it's going to be easier to afford a condo than a large single-family home, or it's going to be easier to get an apartment when you don't have to put down a down payment, those sorts of things. So creating more housing options, having a variety of housing creates opportunities for NOAA, naturally occurring affordable housing. And then the difference between that and uppercase affordable housing, which is legally required by a deed restriction to cost no more than 30% of a household's income, and it's for income eligible households only. This is something that's built by for-profit and not-profit developers, and it can be required through town zoning bylaws. I think it's important for people to understand those two different things, because Millis can really come away with both if Millis is able to get support and adopt a 3A zoning district, because as we've discussed in our earlier meetings, we can require affordability based on a financial feasibility analysis, so we can get naturally occurring affordable housing and uppercase affordable housing through this process. So then the other two boards, one is focused on the benefits of 3A zoning, so people can understand why this is something good for the town to explore. So this board looks maybe a little bit like a bingo card, but again, it's going to be a big board that people can walk around and view, and there'll be people next to it to answer questions. So the first row here is talking about all the different state funds that Millis is going to be eligible for by seeking compliance. And as Bob and Cole noted earlier, interim compliance has already been achieved. So congratulations, you already have eligibility for these three funding sets of state funds as of now. But working through the process to continue to ensure you have eligibility. You have eligibility for housing choice grants. So I put some information and some examples about some things that those grants can fund. So these are really for studies and capital improvements. So it could fund construction of parks, creating complete streets, sidewalk improvements, bikeways. Then the MassWorks program, which is really infrastructure based. So examples about possibly expanding sewer capacity if it's needed, upgrading utility site designs, things of that nature. Eligibility for the Capital Projects Fund. John's going to also confirm this in the DHCD question section, but we have confirmed that a portion of this fund goes to the Millis Housing Authority. So another benefit here is having eligibility for that, which provides funding to the Millis Housing Authority, which serves seniors, persons with disabilities, families, and veterans in need. The other two benefits I flagged here was to have that variety of housing options, so there's more choices for first-time home buyers, seniors that want to downsize, maybe a young teacher that wants to live in town that needs an apartment or something, and then uppercase A affordable housing, where making it clear that we can require up to 10% of housing units in a development under a 3A zone to be affordable, and to also make the point that this isn't some big affordable housing complex. It's affordable units for middle income everyday people that would be fully integrated into the development in the community, which I think is really important for people to understand. And then the bottom three benefits, I think, are more focusing on economic development benefits. So for one, having more housing units near businesses can provide a boost to those businesses by increasing spending power. So for example, house, like an apartment above a storefront really assures businesses in that area, or if there's housing near businesses, that they're always going to have a customer base to rely on because they're in walking distance. This can also attract new businesses. So say there's a grocery or boutique or a restaurant that may consider settling in Millis. If they see more housing units coming in, they may see this as a stronger market and be encouraged to settle in town. And then supporting the workforce, so people who work in a public profession, a teacher, or people work in the service industry and other essential workers. This could be new housing options for them that can make it easier for them to live in town, or possible to live in town in the first place. So those are the benefits that I thought would be important to flag, and an overview of them. And then the final board is something that we've actually been talking about in terms of what can we do through a 3A compliant zone, and what can we not do based on what the state regulations have said. So basically, we adapted this to really be more engaging with members of the public, but I think it's important for them to know what we can do and can't do as we then move towards gathering their input later in the night about where 3A zoning would be and what kinds of housing that we would want to allow through 3A zoning. But essentially, because of Millis's classification, and this is different from other communities, Millis can decide anywhere in town where it would like to have this 3A zone or zones. It can set its own development standards for how the development will need to be configured and look. It can require affordability based on financial feasibility analysis that we can explore through this process. And then this doesn't have to be all a bunch of housing units in one place. You could decide to have multiple districts to kind of spread things out more evenly if you would like. So I think it's important for folks to know that. And then just to make sure that everyone understands per the 3A regulations what we can't do. We can't restrict the age where it's only a senior-only housing development. We can't zone anywhere where there's environmental constraints like wetlands. We can't zone anywhere where there's public land or protected open space like town hall, schools, or conserved land. And then I included a note at the bottom to really make it clear, because a lot of questions I think come up in our meetings, that Millis isn't building any housing. It can't actually force any housing to be built either. This is just regulations that would allow and regulate how the development would take place. But really any kind of decision would be up to a private property owner, and they've got to consider other factors as well, like is it financially feasible, what are the development constraints, and any other factors that go into that. So that's an overview of these first info boards, and then we're going to talk about what we would say in the presentation and the boards where we'd actually have people go to collect their thoughts and input. But before we get there, I just want to stop and see if anyone has any questions or thoughts on these info boards.
If I may.
Yeah,
The third board that differentiates between affordable housing and affordable housing. I think the second we mention affordable housing, even if it's lowercase, people are still going to think 40B. So I'm wondering if there isn't a better way, maybe a new term, or maybe just putting, every time we mention affordable housing, put 40B after it. Because I just don't want people taking a look at the board and say, oh, it's all about affordable housing. You know, maybe we can say housing that is middle income affordable or something like that.
I've seen some communities talk about naturally occurring affordable housing as lowercase a attainable housing, which I think kind of makes sense because it is, you know, something that's where having a greater variety of housing types. So if somebody can't afford a down payment on a really expensive detached single family home, as we all know, housing prices are so high in Greater Boston that you might have to have over $100,000 to put down a down payment. But if you have an opportunity to rent, or you got an opportunity for a condo instead of a big home, it's more attainable. So, what do you think about that terminology, attainable?
I think having different terminology is definitely going to be key. Otherwise, it's going to be a lot of confusion.
Yeah, I think attainable is a good way to phrase it. Yeah, I think that makes sense.
I see Wayne would like to say something.
I think if you change the terminology, you're lying to the people. The second thing is, if you're going to provide housing for the Millis Housing Authority, which hasn't had anything for probably 60 years, that's certainly even below 40B housing. My suggestion is on the 40B, although we put in 10% to cover only this whole menagerie, I think where Millis is so far behind in the 10%, I think we should make it 20%, and part of it should be part of the Millis Housing Authority to provide the seniors. The people that are up there now, they're at the bottom run. If they don't go there, they don't have a place to live. And if you change the wording, you're just lying to the people in the town. Tell them what the truth is, and they'll figure it out from there. They're not stupid.
Yeah,
I don't.
and I think that I was going to follow up and say I think we still need to keep the uppercase A affordable housing there, because that is something
Yes.
that we may be working towards. If we're going to require affordability, we're going to be doing a financial feasibility analysis later on to see if we can do that. But I think maybe instead of the naturally occurring affordable housing, to have the confusion between those two things, we could talk about the first one as attainable. It still carries the same meaning. We want to make sure that it costs no more than 30% of a household's income, but it's in the marketplace. It's not protected by a deed restriction, and it's generally going to be more. Basically, it's generally going to be less expensive, and it's going to be a greater variety of housing, and that's why we've got the missing middle graphic there. So, what does everybody think about that in terms of keeping the uppercase A affordable housing and what is affordable, but then talking about NOAA as more of an attainable thing, so it's not conflated with affordable housing?
Yeah, I have no idea how to raise my hand on this thing. I apologize. I use Teams every day. But I like I do like naturally occurring being called attainable, and I think we just need to uppercase A affordable is 40B. I don't think there's a problem calling it. I believe that's what it is, isn't it? Basically, or
Well, yeah, I want to clarify that. So, 40B is a permitting process for affordable housing, and you get a big affordable housing development.
Right.
It's a lot different than what we're talking about here, because if we get affordable housing like uppercase A through this, it's because a certain percent of units in the development permitted under 3A are required to be affordable, and so those units are within the building or within a development where other market rate units are. Whereas a 40B is going to be typically a much larger development, like very dense and concentrated, and you're going to have 75% market rate and 25% affordable units. And so this isn't a 40B development, but I think it may be worth noting that if we get affordable housing units through this, it will count on the town's subsidized housing inventory, which I think, Wayne, you were getting at, would help the town get to the 10%, which helps out with 40B regulations.
No, it doesn't, because what you're doing is you're putting that 10% on only this project. So it evens out. What I'm saying is you've got to do more than 10% if you want to meet the town requirement.
yeah, and I think that's what I'm hoping the planning board is looking at that. I don't know if they are, but I think that's something we've on the select board talked about. That we would like to see a 20% requirement on. Got it. We'd like to find a 20% requirement on all new large developments be part of our bylaws. Otherwise, you're right. We're just going to keep falling behind further and further. So I think 10% is too little. I think that it needs to be in the 20% range, like you said, Wayne.
Okay, got it. I understand what you're talking about now, Wayne. Well, that's something that we are looking at through the process. We just got to make sure it's financially feasible so that the requirement is something that's not going to increase development costs to deter development. That's something that the state's asking us to look at. So I think in this visioning kind of more broader brush portion of the planning process, we just need to talk about affordability. But when we get to looking at financial feasibility, that's when we can get into the nitty gritty of, do we want to require 10%, do we want to require 20%, how would it look? But that's something that through this process with the assistance that MAPC is providing, we're going to be looking at financial feasibility, and we can get into those details when we get to that point in the process. Is that fair?
Owen had a question.
Oh, I was going to ask about the 40B because I was just looking for some clarification on that. So it's been taken care of.
Okay. All right. Well, sometimes it works out that way. Nicole, you have a question?
Actually, I just want to provide a point of clarification. Craig, not all affordable housing is 40B. So
Right.
to put a 40B
Right.
comment, some affordable housing is LIP. But John, Alex, correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding was with this 3A zoning, we could require up to 10%. We could be affordable, a capital A affordable housing. We could only allow up to 20% if the town had an affordable housing program already on the books when 3A zoning was approved, which we do not. Planning board is in the process of reviewing and creating an affordable housing requirement.
A town-wide one?
Yes.
Okay.
But that is not, we do not currently have any requirements for affordable housing in any development. So because of that, my understanding of the 3A law is that we cannot require higher than 10% in this, in any development that falls under this 3A to be higher than 10% because we don't have that requirement in the town. We are currently looking at doing a step process, meaning if you've got under a certain amount of units in your development, you're not going to have any, I think it's under 6, I think under 5, if it's 6 to 10, you'd have a certain percent, 10 to 20, because you're not going to, there is a big financial expense for a developer to build an affordable unit.
Yeah.
So it's not, you can't just tell a developer, if they're developing 8 or 10 units, you have to make 20% of that because they're not going to do it. The only way they're going to do 20% is if they come in and build 100 units, because that's the only way they're going to make their profit.
Yeah, like have the market rate units offset the
correct.
cost.
So you need 2 market rate units to offset the income from 2 market rate units to offset the loss from a 40B unit. So that's, and we are looking, the planning board is looking into all of that right now. But as far as saying anything under this 3A has to be 20%, and again, Alex, I'm hoping you can clarify that my understanding from the things that the planning board has seen from town council, we can't do that because we don't have that requirement on the book. We didn't have it prior to the passing of 3A.
Yeah, well, this is, as we've talked about before, a constantly evolving process with guidelines that update and things that become clear as we go along. But MAPC's understanding is that no matter what, you can require 10% to be affordable, and then you can go up to 20%, but you have to justify that it's financially feasible. In this process, we're going to be doing a financial feasibility analysis where we'll be able to see if maybe we could get more than 10%. But yes, you are correct that DHCD is concerned about the costs to a development that would be created because of affordability requirement above 10%, which could inadvertently deter development or just make it not possible to finance. And so if you are going to go over 10%, it has to be justified with a financial feasibility analysis, which is something that we're going to be providing through this process. But if the town is working on a town-wide inclusionary zoning policy, that's something that would happen afterwards and would be applying in all zones, not just 3A zone.
I also want to clarify to everybody, just to let them know, we currently have several affordable housing projects in the pipeline.
Right.
And based upon the development that we have, there is a question because of the number of whether or not the development that is looking to go in at Herman Shoe, whether or not that's actually going to work because of the possible PFAS. But if that gets approved with all the other 40B developments we have, we will be like, I think it's 10 or 12 units shy of our 10%. So while at the moment we don't have it, we've got a lot in the pipelines. So we very well in the next year or so could be fairly close to our 10%.
Yeah.
Just to let everybody know where we stand at this moment.
That's good.
And what I was going to say was, I like that stepped approach, Nicole, that you're talking about. And if we can get that adopted at the same town meeting, you vote at the same town meeting, I guess it's the interpretation of law. If that exists for all zoning, the stepped approach that Nicole's talking about, whatever the details are, we'll hammer those out later. Then that would apply to this. Would that apply to this as well, even though it wasn't in place when the state passed it? If it's in place when our town accepts and passes it, so we can put these in the right order.
I believe if we have that step, then
Yeah.
you can, it would apply over the entire town. The concept was what town council had said to us a while back was that you could require all of these 3A zoning to have 20% if you already had that on the books.
Got it.
So I want to clarify that position. So that there are two ways in which DHCD says you are allowed to have a up to 20% requirement. You can do 10 as part of 3A. If you want to go up to 20, you have to either have the 3A district overlaying with an existing 40R district, which I think, Nicole, is what you're referring to. And if you don't have a 40R district, you can still have affordability up to 20% if an economic feasibility analysis is done. So they basically say if you already have something set up, we'll work with you up to the 20% there. If you don't already have something set up, prove to us that it's not going to be a detriment to a developer to get there, and then they'll approve it. So we have a couple different paths forward, and that's why we're going to be taking the step of doing an economic feasibility analysis to be able to prove to DHCD we're not just throwing something at the wall as a development constraint. We're doing something that we think can actually work.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks for that, John.
Yeah. Wayne, did you have a comment?
Yes, I concur, and I think we should sort of move on to the subject, but let the economic analysis to determine if we could go to the 20. Maybe the answer is 12%, not 10. And then let that dictate.
Yeah.
And then we have something.
We'll definitely be having a lot more discussions about that, but I think once that analysis is underway, we'll be able to really dig into it.
Right.
Okay, did anyone have any more comments or thoughts about the info boards? Anything on the benefits that we're flagging for everyone, or this board clarifying what we can do and can't do with the zone?
So I have a comment. Hold on just a sec, Wayne. So I would split them up into separate boards rather than having so much information on one board.
So what we can and can't do, one?
Right, like if what we can and cannot do can be on one board. I mean, I don't know if you mean
Oh,
these to be
these
separate
are
boards.
separate. These are
Okay.
separate boards. So
All
like
right.
this is one board and that's another one.
Okay, that's,
Each of them's like a big 38 by 48.
okay, that's good, because yeah, if you put everything on one, then that's just way too much to read.
Yeah, no.
I had a question too on the boards. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, go ahead, Jeffrey.
So you have about 20 minutes for them to take a look at these boards. Do you plan to have handouts with the information that's on the boards?
That's a good
Place where they can, because it is a lot of information for them to digest by looking at a board, and they may leave this meeting and then have questions or want to think back and get some clarification. And I think if there are handouts for those boards that they can have, then they can take it with them and reread the information.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I mean, we could do handouts also in the kind of parallel survey that people can take. We can upload these into there too, so that they can always look at it online as well later. But then I think you're bringing up a good point. I mean, is 20 minutes enough for people to walk around? We want to make that time a little longer.
I don't think you finish this meeting in 2 hours. I think it's good to have a aggressive agenda, but I think it'll go over. It's kind of always hard to stick to these kind of times.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you
And
have
I
to
think you
assume
should
that folks.
be prepared to go longer than that if need be.
Okay.
Yeah, folks are going to talk to each other too while they're trying to read this, so
Right. Yeah.
you know, having it in hand is going to be helpful.
I think we might want to build in a little more time for this part for people to walk through. But maybe when we get through the rest of it all, we'll have a little bit of a better sense of how much time we want to dedicate to each area. So maybe that's a good transition to the next part of the event. So after people have walked around to look at these information boards, asked questions, had those preliminary discussions to make sure they're just informed and can participate, then it'd be an MAPC presentation. I think there should be an introduction from the town, either Bob or leadership from the town, to just make it clear, you know, MAPC is here as a consultant assisting, but this presentation will give an overview of the planning process and timeline, really state that, you know, we're still in the beginning stages, we're getting the community's vision here, an explanation of what the state 3A regulations are, and then emphasize some of the key information from the board. So if somebody comes late and they didn't look at the boards, they can get it again in the presentation. Or if maybe they didn't get as much time on the boards as they could have, some of the really key stuff will be re-emphasized in the presentation. We'll explain some of the analysis and mapping that we've done to get to the different areas where we'll be thinking about 3A, and then explain the engagement activities. So at that point, we'll be explaining what people want to do to go to the next set of boards, where they're actually going to be able to put sticky notes and dots and different comments to give their input on 3A. So with that, I'm going to pass it to John to go over what we've drafted for those engagement boards.
All right, hold on just a sec, because it looks like Wayne and Mike have some questions.
Sure, sorry. Didn't mean to get
Just one quick one on the on your board for the in terms of the senior housing, the housing authority. Is all seniors are the same? We all are. We all want to know how much money, what percentage. Is there a percentage you can put in there and say the housing authority will get 8%, a specific number?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, it's 10%.
You go, that's, you know, it's just words. It doesn't mean anything.
Sure, that's a great point. So it's 10% roughly, so we can put that number in there. It's a roughly 10%.
Thank you, Wayne. Mike, did you have a question?
Yeah. I hear a lot about having this created and for the town on talking about where to put it, but I don't hear anything about if it does come to fruition, the impacts of the town. How's it going to impact all this housing? And
how's it going to impact fire? How's it going to impact police? How's it going to impact the taxpayer? Right? I don't hear anything on a board or anything for any kind of information on the impacts to the town of creating this and allowing more housing and what the impact is going to be. I think you should come up with some numbers and effective to educate, because there will be some people who will be asking, okay, we're going to add all this housing. You're going to have more. You're going to have to add police. You're going to have to add fire. You're going to have to add water, sewer, all this stuff. So I think you should be ready or have something there to see the impacts of the town and how it's going to, with whatever you're deciding to put in there for numbers, how is it going to impact the tax? That's the key right now. So just my opinion.
Sure, no, thank you. I think we can incorporate some of that information.
I just want to say, Mike, I think that's an excellent point, because what that really will do is it will answer a lot of questions. Will answer questions that they're going to have in their mind about it. So if at least they know people are thinking about it, are conscious of it, I think that'll go a long way. I think that's an excellent point.
All right, let's move on with John. I think you were gonna take us to the next part.
Yeah, so we have a couple different engagement boards, and just so everybody's clear, you can see there's some headings here and some space in between them. These are 3 separate boards. One of them discussing the types of multifamily that people would like to see, another discussing what they feel should be the goals that we're looking to really focus on within the overarching framework of 3A. And then another one asking, where does the multifamily make sense? And I'm going to go through each of these in turn and give a little bit of background as to why we did what we did, and then open up things for a conversation after the fact. I'm going to go ahead and start with the one on the left, the what types of multifamily should be allowed. And we have a couple different options here. Townhouses, small multifamily, large multifamily, mixed use. And then we have another space where people have other ideas or things that they think that we should be considering, or something else that we couldn't really capture here, to go ahead and let us know. So the idea is that people would be interacting with this board and placing a dot on this board anywhere where they would like to see just where they think that this type of housing would be making the most sense in somewhere in Millis. And then while they're also taking a look at that, we have a series of pictures for each housing type. There's 5 for each of them. We are not married to these pictures. There's some that we're certainly going to be switching up a little bit. But the idea here is that we'd have a handful of different sort of design aesthetic options for people to be able to look at and say, okay, we all know the devil's in the details a little bit. So what are the types of things that people would be comfortable as far as how it looks and how they'd be interacting with it and things like that? So the whole idea for this board is to figure out what type of housing and try to get a rough idea as far as how people would like it to look. So that's the purpose of board number 1. For board number 2, there's a handful of things that 3A is designed to do in addition to just, the big goals that the state has about being able to make sure we have enough housing to attract talent as the state's population keeps doing what it's been doing. And we wanted to ask people, what do you see as really being the important parts for how we adapt this to Millis? Because that's going to change how we look at the locations. It's going to change how we look at some of the other goals and how we implement the zoning. So there's a handful of different options that DHCD puts out that says these are the things that we also think this is supposed to do with the local communities. And that is things like adding housing choice, boosting the small business, concentrating development in certain locations to make sure that the open space doesn't get developed, and then things like adding additional housing affordability and creating walkable areas. At the same time, this is another place where we want to be able to give people some options to be able to say, hey, if there's something else that you think this should do or something else we should be considering that isn't just about how the housing looks, let us know what you think we should be accomplishing here so we can take a look at it and see what we can work into our final product. At the last board, we have the where does multifamily make sense, drop a pin. And with this map, what we did was a little similar to what we've shown this group before. And it's a straight map of the town. It has the single family areas in a little bit of a darker area. So we have that higher density residential coming through, looking a little bit brighter at the center. So these are the industrial areas, the commercial areas, the mixed use areas, the residential village, residential district, the residential village center residential district, and just providing a little bit of some additional context. And we didn't take the steps of labeling what the zoning districts are and trying to educate people and potentially confuse them on what that is. So all we're saying is that there are low density residential areas and areas that are not low density residential. And then we also put the excluded land on here as well, with a translucent blue area, and we're going to be asking people to not drop anything on the blue. We felt like that worked really well because, of course, you're not going to put anything in water as well, which is what's going to be blue on this map. And we went back and forth on our team trying to think about these ideas around, should it be open-ended or should we actually start calling things out? And we had this conversation last time about labeling these certain areas, 1A and 1B and 2A and 3A and all that stuff. For the purposes of this, what we decided to do was to keep it a little bit more open-ended and then quantify where people are placing their pins to see if they align with the areas that we've already selected. And our fear is going to be that if people look at this and see there's already some areas that are called out, they're going to feel as though we've already made these decisions for them, and we don't want to give that impression. We really want people to understand that they have a real say in this, and realistically, if everybody comes back and says, you know what, we need to be building somewhere else, that's something that we're really going to consider as we move forward here. We also know that sometimes it's not always easy to look down at the top of a map and figure out exactly where you are. You know how it is. Everybody's got GPS nowadays. Nobody's looking at an atlas to figure out where they are and where they're going. So we threw in some, what we hope are going to be landmarks that people will recognize, mostly along Main Street, things like the old Clico site and the Tractor Supply and the pediatric dentist office, but also the high school where we'll be and a Montessori school on the south side. Like the housing type pictures, these are also things that we are not married to. They're the exact same landmarks that we have on the board where we're asking people where they live. So if the committee has any thoughts on if these should be something else, we're happy to change those up. So that's my elevator pitch on the engagement boards, and I'm looking forward to hearing everybody's thoughts.
I think you should, the members of the committee, and the scuttlebutt in town is, well, you're voting for this because you live over here, or vice versa. I think all of us need to have a pin where we live on that board.
Well, there will be two different boards. One of them is the where you live. The other one is the where does the multifamily make sense. So we'll be able to take a look at those two things and see if everyone is just saying, get all this stuff away from me. We also want to make sure that we're trying to hit as many different parts of the town as possible so we don't end up in a situation where, for instance, lots of people come out to the meeting who live on the south side of town and they all say, put all the multifamily on the north side of town, and make sure that we're getting representation from everyone. So I'm with you, Wayne. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, no, I mean, what I'm saying is the board members. Where, in other words, I live up on Union Street, you should say Wayne Carlson lives here. So that the people that are coming in know where the board makeup and where they come from.
Okay.
Well,
I think that's something.
If you guys want to put your own pins on the where you live board, that's fine. But keep in mind that board, if we want to have that board in the first place, that board would be at the sign-in table. This board is going to be at a completely different part of the room when you're at the end, near the end, like the second half of the meeting, let's say, and you're saying, like, where do you think multifamily makes sense?
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I'm just trying to be as open and transparent as possible.
Sure, absolutely. So if that's something that we want to explore as far as just saying this is where the committee members live, I don't know if we necessarily need to call out anybody's names or anything like that, but we could certainly add some additional dots to these maps and say this is where the committee lives.
I don't think that you should put committee members' dots on these maps. Okay. I don't think you should do that. Sometimes you know, people can be unpleasant, and I would not want to put committee members on blast like that. If you want to maybe put a pin in a welcome table board of where you live like everyone else, I think that's great. At most, if you want to use a different color pin to say you're a committee member, that's fine. But in terms of this analysis, I don't think you need to disclose where you all live. And, you know, you got to remember some people can be here and not be so pleasant. And I wouldn't want to, you know, put you in at risk of being harassed or something.
Perhaps if you're going to use the push pins that have the different colors, as Alex says, maybe say one color for committee members.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think that
and that would be good for us, so we can know like what the public said and what people on the committee said.
That would be good too.
Yeah. So why don't we do that? We'll use different pin colors. We'll have a different set of pins for committee members.
So, so you think this is a better way to go than to mark out areas that are under consideration?
Why don't I bring up the map that we showed like at the last meeting, and then let's compare it with this one, because I think it would be interesting to see what your thoughts are. If you recall at our last meeting, John went through a series of maps
Right.
showing how we got to the areas that we thought from an analysis made sense for 3A consideration. And you'll see that it is roughly reflected in this map, where the darker shaded areas are kind of areas that we are low density single family areas that, you know, you wouldn't likely want to have multifamily development, and that the brighter areas are the town center, the commercial area here along Main Street, and then the area that's currently zoned industrial further west down Main Street. So why don't you just take a quick look at what we looked at last time. So after we went through all of those maps of analysis to exclude the single family residential areas, to exclude the land that DHCD says has to be excluded because it has environmental constraints or it's public land and can't be developed. And then we looked at areas from where the housing production plan that was done said would make sense for multifamily housing and housing development. And then we looked at that ULI 3A study. And then as a reminder, this is the mixed use zone that actually is like pretty close to allowing density that would be 3A compliant. And then that commercial area that after our discussion we actually added in. But we had these circles of like general areas that could be referred to as like 1A, 1B, and then we have since added 1C after our discussion, and then that industrial zone area on the western part of Main Street. So this is what we looked at from an analysis perspective, and then this is what we're thinking of doing for public input, where we've tried to put the information we think the public needs to know, but not necessarily said you have 4 options. You know, theoretically they could put a pin, you know, like say over here. And then basically what we could do is after the forum, we could see what the public's pins and where they've put them compares with what our analysis showed. Or we could update this map and add some circles and maybe say like these are the recommended areas. So that's something that we really want to see what the committee thinks. It would be good to know what the group's thoughts are on the approach.
Owen?
I think you're spot on.
So I have a few comments / questions. The first, and I'll just run through them all and then you can address them, Alex, maybe. The first question is like, how granular do you expect people to get when they put their pins down as far as locating, you know, where they would be okay to see this? The next question is, would it be helpful to have a map or have somewhere on the day, like what existing zoning already is for people to have that, knowledge and whatever already. And then my third comment is on the map itself, the excluded. I don't think that there's enough contrast in the areas on the map where you could do this zoning and where you can't. Like, I'd almost like to see the excluded land like red or have more of a higher overlay.
Just to stand out more.
Yeah, just like it's really hard. Like it's all too. There's no contrast going on there, so it feels like it's like a little bit hard to really understand exactly what is happening. And I mean, almost if like all this land on the very south and the very north is, I guess it's only in the blue that's really excluded. So you could, I was gonna say, like, does it make more sense to like almost just like zoom in and focus on like 109 Main Street, like just kind of like the center strip of town, and not so much on the north and south sides. But never mind, I was reading the map wrong because I think the contrast was throwing me off.
Yeah, I do agree though that I think a better contrast for what's clearly excluded, because it makes no sense to let people think that you can put it in the areas where it just won't be allowed.
Mm-hmm.
The other map was more legible, really, from a,
Much more legible, yeah.
yeah.
The other map was more legible because we didn't have any overlays, so we want to make sure that people can still see the streets underneath it for context, but we can certainly increase the contrast a little bit. These are a little bit arbitrary, and you guys got to keep in mind too that it's going to be printed and it's going to be 48 inches high, and there'll be people standing there to kind of talk through it with folks. So people aren't going to be left blind, and we'll make sure that there's people that are talking things through and able to make sure everybody understands what's going on.
Like,
we can certainly
John will be next, and he'll explain things.
So if somebody's
John,
jamming
could
their
you also-
pen in the middle of the swamp, you'll be able to tell them to stop.
Exactly.
Could you also add to the key where you have, all you have is listed low density and excluded land? So people looking at it, and I'm looking at it obviously on a much smaller level, but not only is I'm squinting, probably just because my eyesight stinks, to distinguish, the blue, but explain to people, okay, so you're showing what low density is, you can't really tell what color that is, and then what's the green? People are gonna, okay, well, what's the green? What's the light? Can you actually list what each color is instead of just low density and excluded? What does green represent? What does blue represent? What does dark gray represent? And what does light gray represent? Or, and maybe have some contrast, just so that people can clarify. I also would, to that point, would ask if you could, if you're going to use these photographs of Clico High School, because all of these are, other than the high school, are private property. The first time I looked at this, the first thing I thought on this map was, did we decide these were the target areas? And I think you're going to have some people who are going to question, especially if there are a bunch of people around one map and they can't get close enough to read it all, they're going to think that these photographs represent the areas that we are looking to put this, and then says, drop a pin. Okay, am I supposed to drop a pin on one of these 5 photographs or one of these 5 spots? So I think having those photographs within an arrow, just my opinion, I think may actually detract from what you're looking
I
to achieve.
think like that's a really good point, Nicole. I think maybe we keep them on the where do you live and make it really clear that those are reference points, but take them off of this one and then maybe just have a star that says you are here, like where the high school is.
Yeah. you know, at least as long as 109 and 115 and Village Street are able to be kind of figured out on the map, I think people will be able to figure it out for the most part of, you know, what they're looking at.
If you want to have reference points, I think what would be safer would say to choose a color unit like red and have half a dozen dots across the map and then have a list. You know, dot 1 is the high school, dot 2 is Tractor Supply, dot 3 is, like, you know, if you're going to do something like that. But yeah, I think Jody's right. I think, you know, if you can clearly designate 109, 115, Village Street. We're a little town, and most of us have lived here for an awful long time. So I think the people that you get to come to this, they know what the map looks like, and they're gonna pretty much know where, you know. I live off of Village Street, so whether I'm on Blueberry Lane or the next road over, I may be squinting. Yeah, I'm roughly here, but they're gonna know the difference between, you know, these major roads.
Yeah, and I think the idea of a couple numbered dots in various locations in the town too, not just along that main street, just so clear up for some people that might be newer. But I like that numbered dots or something. But I think you're absolutely right. This is gonna make people think these are selected areas.
Yeah, that's what I'm concerned with, people feeling like they're being guided.
So we feel that pictures and lines would make people feel that they're guided, but dots would not. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, I was gonna say that you might run into the same issue with dots and listing the sites, because someone could look at that and say, oh, this is the options. I wonder if you did not have references if you think people can follow where we're at.
Maybe just the you are here dot 109 and
Yeah.
I like it more.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing from
Yeah,
you guys.
if you can
is that most
highlight
folks
109 Village Street and 150, because 109 and 115, that's basically the cross between north, that designates north, south, east, and west.
Yeah.
Order, you know, the four corners of the town. So I think as long as those roads are, you know, visible, I don't really think, other than, as Craig said, the you are here dot is really necessary.
Yeah.
You know, if we were Newton, you know, the size of Newton or something like that, then I'd say, yeah, you know, but we all kind of know where we are.
Okay.
Mike, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, is the committee just focusing on 50 acres? I think it would be important to let people know, you know, are we looking at the 50 acres or are we looking for more than 50 acres? And to follow up on that, if it's, for example, I want to meet the minimum standard, how many units can you potentially fit in 50 acres? So you come up with a number, because some residents may say, okay, 50 acres, how many houses is that? Or how many units is that? I think you should have some sort of rough calculation of what that equals to, so that people will understand and know, yeah, you're talking about area, you're talking about different parts of town that have this, but what's the real impact? What's, you know, how many units can you put on one piece of property that's 10 acres, for example? You know, I get a lot of feedback on that big development that was just built up there in Midway, with the multifamily dwelling units there.
What's the name of that?
That's Hatton Apartments. It's 37 Main Street in Medway. It's 190 units.
Oh, in Medway, okay.
Yeah.
So there's two parts of what you're saying here, and one of them is we don't need an estimation. We know that it's going to be 750 units, and we know that because it has to have a gross density across all the districts of 15 units per acre, and that's where it becomes challenging to get to the second part of what you said, because we can't for sure say it's going to look exactly like this, and that's part of why we have these different housing types in here too, because we could have some parts of the 3A compliance that are a little bit higher than 15 units an acre and some parts that are a little bit lower, as long as it all evens out to 15 in the end. So it doesn't have to be uniform throughout the areas. We could have a few different 3A districts as long as there's a district that isn't smaller than 5 acres, and one of the districts has to be at least 25 acres. So we have a little bit of flexibility to kind of play with here, and it becomes challenging for us to say, for sure, this is what this would look like. So that's why that stuff has been omitted.
Well, maybe just an estimate, because
Yeah.
the normal person's not going to understand, okay, 50 acres, what does that equal? You just said around 700 and something, right?
Well, I just want to note that it is shown in about the project board that you have to have it by right. There has to be a minimum gross density of 15 dwelling units per acre.
Yeah, but the normal person's not going to understand that language.
Right.
Yeah, 15 times 50 is 750 units. I mean, we can put that number on there if we think it's helpful. It's also something that John could just explain in his presentation.
Right, I think you should have that somewhere.
Yeah. And that was also what I was going to say. And to some of your points about like, should we show like what the existing zoning is and things like that stuff that we could explain in the presentation before people go to this board, so they know that.
And I just wanted to follow up with one more comment,
Yeah.
if I may. The state comes up with all these mandates, which is, I don't think they talk to each other up there in the state house from one department to the other, because they don't, they realize now, when you're looking at the new energy code that just came out in January 1st, which gave building officials 4 days to try to understand how to implement it. In the future, when you look at building these developments in the future, it's going to get more and more complicated to squeak out a profit for developers. And with the energy code, the state is mandating that the state come at 50% of their 1990 emission levels by 2030. Now that's only 7 years away, and to do that, they really ratchet up the energy code requirements, which is going to at least on a single-family dwelling unit cost a developer $40,000 to $50,000 more to meet these regulations that the energy people is imposing upon construction. So, and when we get to the energy code, the town's going to be faced with options of adopting an opt-in energy code, which I'm totally against. But if they do, that would ratchet it up even further. So I think going forward and building these buildings is going to be a huge deterrent, and it's going to knock out the developer who's the half a dozen to a dozen employees, and developers who are like Toll Brothers, Thorndike, all those big developers are just going to get stronger, because that's the only people who are going to be able to build these buildings. Just a comment that I wanted the whole committee to be aware of what's coming down the pipe, that the energy people has already passed in the next generation climate plan. So it's going to become more and more complex as you look at buildings, and be careful on something that you're going to be looking for to build, because it might not be feasible to build something like that. They'd have to do it obviously to make a profit. So that's all I have to say.
No, it's definitely interesting. The MAPC housing team is definitely following, what kind of potential development impacts are coming from the new building code and energy efficiency standards. But it's a little bit more detailed than what we're looking at in our high level process here, but definitely relevant and interesting nonetheless. But I just want to give others a chance to weigh in. I know others have their hands up, but Wayne and Gordon.
Yeah, Wayne, you have a question?
Just a couple of comments to Alex, while whoever's doing the graphics here. If you take the areas we're really not considering here, if you throw a 50% screen on it, you'd be all right. Number 2, you need an added north arrow to the plan. Number 3, turn around and, as we said, highlight Route 109 and 115, but also put the names of the towns around it. I know the town like the back of my hand, but somebody coming in the blind doesn't. And the last thing is, I agree with Nicole as far as taking the photographs off, because it really does sort of push us to say, this is what we want you to have. And that was the main issue why the senior center went down the tubes. All the seniors felt one driving force. They were not asked, they were told. And if we show 1B in all these different sections, we're saying to people in the town, this is where you're gonna have it. You have no choice. So Nicole's point of not trying to force people into one corner, let them make their own decision, I think is very valid. And the last thing is, as Mike just alluded to, 50 acres. I know what 50 acres is. If you go to Oak Grove Farm, that's 100 acres. Half of that is 50. I'm a surveyor, it's different, but the average person doesn't see that. So I think someplace on this plan, draw a little square, there's 50 acres, and say, this is the size area we're looking for. The average person cannot perceive 50 acres.
Yeah, I think that could be confusing though, because, you know, we're trying to operate within the districts that we currently have as well, and not just say, we'll do, you know, let's permit one little development on 50 acres right here, you know, out by Tresco Brothers, you know,
Maybe
let's
as
say.
a reference point, we could say like, in the presentation, if we give some more information on zoning there, we could say, for reference, this zone is this many acres, and then show an outline of that zone.
I liked what Wayne was saying. I don't know that I'd draw it on the map, but if you're gonna lose the pictures of pediatric dentistry, Tresco, Woodside, Montessori, maybe draw a 50-acre square, a 10-acre square, and say this is 50 acres, this is 10 acres, just to give people an idea.
Yeah.
So they can see what it looks like. And if you do a 10-acre square, I guess the minimum size is 5 acres, you said, and 20 acres is has to be at least one of them. And so maybe a couple squares that just show what it looks like, that's what we're looking for, but not on top of any of the property that's there already, so it doesn't appear that we're leading people.
If you get back to Dan, what Dan was mentioning at the beginning, I thought Dan had sent around a map to members of the committee where he superimposed 50 acres on the town center. Did anybody get that? I thought everybody was
I
copied
think
on
somebody came in, but I would not show it on the map, only because.
that. No, not on this map, but he was showing that, he just made up a town, he took the town map off the GIS and superimposed 50 acres on it, saying, this is all it is. I don't know if anybody, I can send that out to you folks and see.
I saw it referenced, but I don't recall seeing it.
Okay, I thought that went to
Maybe
everybody.
it's someplace, but I
I
don't.
don't think I got it, but
I can send that, have that send again, send it around
But
again.
what if instead of drawing on a map, what if you had a different, somewhere different, and you listed certain properties and just indicated what those properties were? For example, the town fields are 14 acres. Stony Brook is 19 acres. The high school is 12 acres. The Roach Brothers Plaza is 8 acres. And now, you know, if you're trying to give people a way of picturing a size without, I think, any sort of overlay on this map, especially if you do on this map that we're seeing right now, you could very easily, somebody who is not up close and reading the whole thing may think that's where they want it. But if you did a separate space that said, what does 50 acres look like? Oak Grove is 100 acres. The Oak Grove soccer fields combined are X acres, but the high school property is 12 acres. You know, I'm just looking at the GIS map right now. The Roach Brothers Plaza is it's about 9.5 acres with the CVS. And that way those are things that people, they have an idea, they know what those They know what that is.
Yeah.
You know, we all can visualize what Roach Brothers Plaza looks like. Okay, that's, you know, that many acres. We can visualize what the town fields look like. We can visualize, you know, the high school, you know, the high school property with just the high school itself, the back football. Just, if you're gonna try to, instead of overlaying, I think if you, you know, had something completely different, you could just list off certain places and give people that way to say, oh, all right, you know, because I agree with Wayne. Wayne knows exactly what 100 acres looks like. You know, to me, the difference between 50 and 100 acres, unless I have something, I know I'm not going to visualize it.
We can include some reference points, but just remember that we don't have to do it here. We have the whole presentation. We're going to include lots of explanatory information for people before they get to that map. And then
And it may not need to be on a board, but just if somewhere in that, you know, if you presented a list, even just in your presentation, and you had that as one of the handouts to say, what does 50 acres look like?
yeah, we could do
We have
that.
to have at least, we have to have one area that's at least 25 acres. What does 25 acres look like?
Right. And that's why I'm talking about the squares that are not on the map, but they're off to the edge of the map, so they're not overlaying any particular property. But to me, that would even be a little more helpful if I'm looking for something that's, I don't know, who knows what the scale is, but an inch by an inch on this map is different to me than.
Yeah, I think that's where I think that it gives you something more visual to think about, because it's a concrete area that you know, as Nicole said, rather than putting an overlay. I think that would be a good visual reference for people to get a much better handle on what that size would look like.
I think the difference with this board is that we're not asking people to draw squares or asking them to identify sites that are big enough. We just want to see where they're comfortable with it. And then we'll come back to this group. We'll do some things on our end and present you guys with some ideas based on the feedback, what those would look like. So I do think it's important to have some point of reference that tells people, hey, this is what this looks like, so you can help visualize it. And Wayne and Craig, you guys were spot on. Like, there's a reason why lots of map elements aren't included here that are normally included, and it's because we had all these other reference points for Tractor Supply, high school, etc. If we get rid of that, it gives us a little bit more flexibility to add some of those other things in there, maybe some other legend elements and a north arrow and things like that. So what I'm hearing from you guys is we want to make sure that it's conveyed to the folks how much land we're actually talking about, how many units we're actually talking about, and we'll make sure that that gets across at some point during the presentation. It could be a supplemental handout or something like that where people look at, but the point of this map is just getting an idea where people are comfortable having some multifamily stuff happen. That's really the underlying goal here.
Yeah, thanks, John. Owen, you've been waiting very patiently. You have something to add?
I know we've been focused on the map. I wanted to jump over to the housing types board, and maybe it makes sense to do this within the presentation, but does adding things like, you know, number of units or like density or I don't know, some more like explanatory details about the differences, but especially between like small multifamily and large multifamily. Does it make sense to clarify that, or is that something you would do in the presentation itself?
Yeah, that's exactly something we would do in the presentation. So the idea is that we would give everybody during the presentation enough information to feel confident coming up to these boards and being able to let us know how they feel about it. So we'll have examples. This is a townhouse. This is an example of a townhouse development. This is what the density is. And then give people a little bit of just something to kind of get their juices flowing so they have some time to think about it before they come up to this for the first time.
Yeah. And then just keep in mind that we are thinking about what are we going to do with the input after we get it. And so I think this housing type board gives us a sense of what we would consider when we get to the point where we're thinking about drafting the zoning of like what types of homes do people seem to favor. And then also we have a lot of photos in there where we can get a sense of some of the design and looks that people seem to like. And it's not like we're going to write it so it's like, oh, it's got to look like this, but it gives us a sense of the type of things that the public seems to like, and then we can work that into guidelines in the zoning. But yeah, we're like getting really close to time, and I did want to ask if anyone had thoughts on the photo examples, and if there were any other photo examples that we might want to be bringing into it. If anyone maybe had suggestions or any just like impressions about the photo examples we have in here so far, because we can certainly bring some other ones in or change this up a little bit, or if there's like a particular look that you think we need to get people's input on.
I think on the mixed use one, that those last two photos might be kind of scary for folks, because they're kind of, if they're thinking about, that would be going in the commercial areas of town, they might be kind of out of character with what's already there. So if you could find some photos that, that middle one looks more similar to kind of what we already have in the downtown, like where, the dry cleaner and Cravings and all of that are. And so, along some of the side streets, but making it look like it's pretty close to large multifamily, I think, is a little bit confusing.
Okay. I
Are
think that's,
existing photos, existing properties appropriate? Like would a picture of Centennial Place be a photo you'd use for an example of mixed use?
yeah, it totally could be. All the stuff on here are real places. I think there might be one or two renderings of places that did actually get built, but these aren't figments of our imagination. So if you guys have anything that you think would work really, really well to fill these out, let us know or tonight, or send us an email. And what we'll do is we'll get this presentation out to you guys first thing tomorrow morning, so you can take another look at it. And then if there's any thoughts that you guys have after you've taken a few days to kind of think it over, let us know, and we'll make sure that we're able to make adjustments as we're able to.
Yeah, I think that's a cool idea. Maybe like one of the photos could be an existing development in town, and the other ones could be other examples.
Yeah, I like that.
But yeah, if you want to give us that input by email, and if there are photos that you think that may be useful that we could consider bringing into it, please do send that our way. But just in the interest of time, I want to see if it's okay to go and just talk about how we're moving to promote the forum. But
Yes,
want to make sure that nobody has any other things they want to talk about first. Okay. All right. So the forum, again, we have the date scheduled February 21st, 7 p.m. at the high school. We have a press release that we've drafted, and we have a full communications team at MAPC that has all press contacts, and so they're going to send that out to all the media outlets, and usually we're pretty successful with getting different news outlets to pick it up. So we'll send that out to the media outlets, but we'll also provide it to the committee as a resource if you want to use that for your own personal invitations. But I think probably the more useful one for you to invite folks is the digital flyer. We'll send that out later this week so you can begin making invitations. But this is something that you could throw into an email, you could put on your social media. Bob, I think we should put this on the website, the town social media platforms, and if there's newsletters or anything, we've already talked a little bit about that. But that should go out and everything that we can get it out in. As a goal, if each committee member could get 10 participants that you think are going to really bring a lot and represent different areas of the town, that would be excellent. At a minimum, maybe if we could have 10 people per committee member as a goal, but hopefully even more than that. And also keep in mind that this will be broadcast by Millis TV, so if anybody isn't actually there, it'll reach a wider audience. And then we also have a digital survey that parallels this for people who also weren't able to make it. But let's try and get as many people there as possible. Let's get people from the select board, planning board, all towns and committees really need to be invited to this. Because this is the opportunity not just for the general public, but for all the different sectors of the town to have an opportunity to come in. I mean, there were some thoughts about like what does police and fire think about this? Would that add capacity kind of concerns? Well, let's make sure they come to the forum. Let's hear from them. Let's target specific community groups, try and represent different areas of town. We're working with Bob on specific places to really get invitations out to. But then the one question that I had before we close is we need to have an event registration page for a couple reasons. So first, as planning the event, we need to have a sense of how many people are going to come, so we can make sure there's enough MAPC staff there, and we can see, if folks from the committee are able to possibly help staff some certain areas if it is a big crowd, but we need to know the size of the crowd. And then also it's a promotion mechanism as well. So I was wondering if there is a town Facebook page that we would want to use and make a Facebook event, or if we just want to do Eventbrite or another platform where we can just include some information about the event to prime people, and then we can get the numbers of how many people have confirmed so that we can prepare not only the engagement activities, but we're going to have food and refreshments, so we want to have the right idea of how many people are going to be there. Any thoughts on any of that? And then any thoughts on whether you want to do Facebook event page or just something more simple like an event?
Alex, we actually have 2, I think maybe 3 Facebook page available. One of the town does have a Facebook, and Millis Media also has one, and Madeline can talk to that, and probably the school does as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I would think if you wanted to do that, I think we sent you already the link for folks who will be tuning in but not be able to be there, and the QR code if they want to join. But certainly we can publicize registration through our Facebook and even our online presence as well with our channels.
Okay. Well then, we'll coordinate with you, Bob and Madeline, on an event registration page, and we can use that to promote, but also let's just make sure that John and I can see it too, so that we can just plan based on how many people are RSVPing.
Great.
Any questions on the flyer or press release, or thoughts or maybe inspiration about promoting the event?
Question on the registration page. People are going to see this a registration page, and then they're going to, some people are going to forget to register. Some people aren't going to know how. And how will they know they can still come, even if they don't register? And I assume we're inviting people to come who don't register.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, registration is encouraged but not required. We want to make sure that anybody who hears about it can come. This is purely for our purposes, so that, if we need to pull somebody else aside and say, hey, it looks like there's going to be 500 people at this thing, can we please get 1 or 2 more folks to come out tonight and help us out? That's really what this is about, to make sure that we have a rough understanding. But we're not going to be checking IDs at the door. We're not going to be making sure someone's on the list to get in or any of that kind of stuff. We want it to feel as open and inviting as possible while still trying to get a decent head count.
Yeah, I just want to make sure people don't see this and then disinvite themselves because they said, oh, I didn't register, so I'm not going to go.
No, that's a good point. And then, in our planning process, typically with a town the size of Millis, I've seen events range from anywhere from 25 to 50 to 100 or more people. I mean, do you have a sense of how many people have come to events like this in the past?
Yeah, we had about 60 people when we did the open space plan.
Okay.
60 or 70 people when we did that.
Senior center study groups had about 60 per group for a big one. And that was for a tax increase. When we did the Glen Ellen purchase, but again, that was for a potential tax increase, that had about 150 people, maybe. So
We had about 60 or 80 people that came to the informational when they were first choosing the designs for the Clyde Brown.
Yeah, yeah, and I think there were 1 or 2 sessions of that even. So, yeah, I'm gonna guess it's gonna be between 50 and 100. I don't think it's gonna exceed 100, and I doubt it'll be less than 50.
Alex, if you can get 500 people to show up, then you're gonna have to give us a class on how to get 500 people to show up to town meeting.
Exactly.
Yeah, we have articles to raise taxes that get 400 people to show up. So, yeah, spend $52 million, get 400 people. Yeah, so,
Always good to be a victim of your own success, right, Craig?
yeah. So I'm guessing between 50 and 100, but I mean, it'll be 50 to 100 animated people, and it's not gonna be people that are there for the cookies and coffee.
I mean, the idea is you want to have people that you think will eventually be at town meeting down the road, and so.
That'll be who's there, yeah.
Those ones will show up.
Yeah.
The same group.
Yeah. Wayne, do you have something to add?
Bob, can we use the enhanced 911 where, for instance, if you're flushing fire hydrants, it's information to the public?
Yeah.
Can we use that? Is that allowed?
I'll find out tomorrow.
And it is, we've used it for town meeting, and this seems to
Yeah,
follow
well,
that
yeah.
same base.
Yeah.
So,
But we want
I
to do
think
it
it is.
time-wise, closer to the event.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Right.
yeah.
Well, the town also has an email.
Yeah, we
You know,
have
can use
yeah,
the town and the school both have an email system, you know, that
Yeah.
big email, I
Yeah.
don't know what they call it. But
Listserv.
yeah, it's a listserv.
listserv, thank you.
So yeah, you could put the flyer
Getting
in,
late.
or you could pull language from the flyer or the press release and put it in those communications.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
Yeah,
thanks, everyone.
the,
Thanks.
the town responds very well to digital, to social media. You know, it's just the right size, and they do, so we should get a very good response off the social media.
Okay. Well, thanks, everyone. Thanks, Jody, Bob, everybody. That's all that we have in the discussion for tonight. But I don't know if there's anything else that you want to discuss before we close.
Yes, piece of new business. I had written a tentative letter for the Board of Assessors, and I believe the chair has it. I'm not sure. Essentially, I was asking, what is the change in value? You know, people are going to say, well, it affects my neighborhood where I live, and that affects value. I'm putting my assessor's hat back on here. But I think that question needs to be addressed, and I don't think the assessors should be tasked by a committee. They're a town committee, so if anything, that should be addressed through Mr. Schultz, through the selectman's office, to task the assessors. If you think it's appropriate, I mean, you've been in the finance end of it for decades.
I think it's kind of hypothetical until you have a site, but I think that it's worth having a conversation. I'm not sure what they can come up with, because the construction of the school, because I live across the street from the school, my property value went up considerably, which is good or bad depending on taxes or resale. You know, so I think it's something that we have to. Yeah, I'll ask them if they have any ideas how they can approach that. We'll go with something along those lines.
And then I forgot, we did have some updates on the DHCD questions, but since we're just a little over time at this point, John will just send out updates on that by email.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, and there was one comment in the chat, there was a couple, but Mike, I think we addressed you on that. From John Stedman, who says, I don't believe the Braun property should be blue, which I think the Braun property is, 23 acres of farmland that we bought last year or the year before.
It's over by the Montessori school.
Yeah. So, and we can talk about that. I pretty much agree with him. You know, so, and I'll mention that to you, talk to you guys about that also.
Yeah, there's a lot of multi up there also.
Certainly a consideration, Wayne. Just so you guys know, a lot of that stuff that goes under the can't be developed is they have all these different codes for property, and that was something that they just said this is publicly owned land, so they're assuming that it's like being used for a municipal purpose or being used for open space. So if we find stuff that's clearly not the case, and it is land that the town is holding to be developed, then we can talk to DHCD and get that taken off the excluded properties list. I don't know what that process would look like. I'm meeting with DHCD again on Friday, and I'll ask, and we'll see what we can make of it.
All right, thank you, John. So I think we can let MAPC go and handle the rest of our business, or do we need to set another meeting date?
I mean, I believe that this is what we need to discuss before the forum. So the next meeting would come after the forum.
Okay. All right, why don't we circle back through email to try to figure out meeting dates after that. I'll just let you know it won't be on Wednesdays because starting the 15th, I will be in finance committee meetings on Wednesdays. So it'll have to be on a different night.
I think people wanted to meet not in the evening anymore, right?
There was a question about that. I work all day, so
Yeah,
I can't meet during the day.
Okay.
We
Well,
can't meet during the day.
we could send out a doodle poll, and everybody could just mark like what times they're free, and we could just pick one that way.
Yeah, I have a real tough time before 7 o'clock because I have to commute from Quincy. So
Oh boy. Okay.
I'm already taking a couple vacation days to do town work.
Well, we'll send out some times in the evening, and then you'll be able to just like go and say which ones you're free, and then we'll see which one works for everybody.
That works.
Yeah.
All right. Well, why don't we let MAPC go, and then we can turn over to our minutes and review those.
All right.
Right.
Thanks, Joe.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank
you so
you,
much.
Alex
All right.
and John. We appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. Thank you guys very much.
Talk to y'all soon.
We'll talk
Have a good day.
soon.
Yeah. Bye.
Great. So we have the minutes that were sent to us from 12/14. If everyone's had a chance to review those, I will entertain a motion on that.
Madam Chair, I make a motion that we accept the minutes as written.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to accept the minutes of our 12/14 meeting as written. Any discussion? All right, all those in favor, please say or indicate aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstaining? All right, it passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Any further items that we need to discuss before we adjourn? All right, hearing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Been moved and second to adjourn. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Thank you
Okay.
all.
Thank you all,
Thanks.
and good night.